Thank you, Mr. President. And I rise in strong support of the Paying a Fair Share Act, and I commend Senator Whitehouse for introducing this important legislation. Mr. President, it is absurd that at a time when our country has a $15 trillion national debt and enormous unmet needs, the wealthiest people in this country have an effective tax rate that is lower than many middle-class workers. It makes no sense that the richest 400 people in our country, who earned an average of more than $270 million each in 2008, pay an effective tax rate of just 18%, which is less than many small businessmen, nurses, teachers, police officers, etc. That is wrong from a moral perspective. It is also very bad economic policy. But, Mr. President, the issue we are debating today really speaks to a much larger crisis that is taking place in America. And that is that in many important ways, the United States is departing from its democratic tradition, which has always included a strong and growing middle class, and is moving rapidly into an oligarchic form of government in which almost all wealth and power reside in the hands of the very richest people in our society, the top 1%. That, Mr. President, is not what America is supposed to be about. Let me mention to you a recent study which shows not only why we should pass this Buffett Rule, but why we should go, in fact, much further. An economist at the University of California, Professor Emmanuel Sayers, studying tax returns, found that in 2010, 93% of all new income generated during that year went to the top 1%. Let me repeat that. Between 2009 and 2010, the last year we have statistics on this issue, 93% of all new income went to the top 1%, while the rest of the people, the bottom 99%, were able to receive 7%. Even more incredible is the fact that 37% of that new income went to the top 100th of 1%. In other words, of the $309 billion in new income gained in 2010, $288 billion went to the top 1%. Only $21 billion in new income went to the bottom 99%. Mr. President, today the top 1% earns over 20% of all income in this country, which is more than the bottom 50%. In terms of distribution of wealth, accumulated income, as hard as it may be for us to believe as a country which believes in mobility, in a country which believes in equality, today we have a situation where the 400 wealthiest people in America now own more wealth than the bottom half of America, 150 million people. 400 people here own more wealth than the bottom 150 million Americans, and that gap between the very rich and everybody else is now wider than it has been in this country since the late 1920s, and we have by far the most unequal distribution of income and wealth of any major country on earth. So that is where we are today as a nation, and it is not a good place to be. The richest people and largest corporations are doing phenomenally well. while the middle class is collapsing and poverty increases. This is not what democracy looks like. This is what oligarchy and plutocracy look like. And to compound this extremely unfair situation, when millionaires and billionaires are paying nearly the lowest effective tax rate for the rich in decades, our deficit problems only grow worse. In other words, not only are the real and effective tax rates for the rich lower than many middle-class workers, their low effective tax rates are having a very negative impact on our deficit. In fact, today, as a result of the tax breaks given to the wealthy and large corporations, revenue as a percentage of GDP is at 14.8%, the lowest in more than 50 years. So, Mr. President, let us pass the Buffett Rule today, but let us do much more in the future. Instead of cutting Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, education, and other programs of vital importance to middle-class and working families in this country, as many of my Republican colleagues would like to do, let us develop both personal and corporate tax policies which are fair and which protect the best interests of our country. Nobody should be talking about maintaining huge tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires and in the same breath talk about cutting Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the needs of our children and the needs of the most vulnerable people in our country. That is wrong, and that is not what America is about. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.